button. And I'm Shannon Dill. I'm with University of Maryland Extension. Welcome to today's Wednesday webinar, Water Testing Basics and Understanding Water Test Results. And with that, I am excited to introduce Rachel. She has presented a number of times for us, and she'll be talking about this subject. Quickly, I'd like to just shout out to our sponsors and collaborators of these webinar series. We've been doing them for about 4 years now. So a big thank you to everyone that helps make them possible. So with that, Rachel, you should be able to share your screen, and you're on mute. Anybody that has questions, please feel free to put those in the chat pod. Sounds good.
Okay, Shannon, good afternoon to everyone. Thank you to Shannon for having me today, and thank you all for joining. I'm so happy to be here with you virtually to talk about the importance of water testing and the basics of why, how, and what to sample, and interpreting your water test results. So my name's Dr. Rachel Rosenberg-Goldstein. I'm an assistant research professor at the University of Maryland in College Park, in the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources and the School of Public Health. So today I'm going to go over the following. First, why is it important to test your water? What types of things do you need to test for? How do you properly collect a water sample? How does the testing itself work? And then how do you interpret the results when you receive water testing results? And then I'll end with just a number of resources on the topic of water quality and water testing. So first, why test your water? Well, water is the basis for life. It's necessary for our health and for so many other uses, including in agriculture for a number of activities such as irrigation. We're extremely lucky that in the United States we have mostly high quality water. But it's important to note that no water is 100% pure. And sometimes there can be constituents in water. They could be biological, like bacteria or viruses, or chemical, and those can impact our health. So there are a number of reasons why you might be interested in testing your water. If you're on a farm, you might be required to test your water by a number of different regulations designed to protect food safety. Those could be FDA's Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, or if you are doing GAP certification, Good Agricultural Practices, those both have water testing requirements. And I'll go into more detail about FSMA and its specific water testing requirements on the next few slides. But another reason that you might be interested in testing your water is testing it for your household use. And the reasons to test your home water can be highly dependent on where you live and the activities occurring near your home. This can be important in urban areas when you think about aging lead pipes that can corrode and leak into water supplies, or if you live near an industrial site. But water testing is especially important if the water in your home is supplied by a private well. So I'll go into each of these different reasons for why you should test in the next few slides. So I'll start with FSMA and requirements for agricultural water testing. So FSMA was signed into law by President Obama in 2011. And the goal of FSMA is to prevent foodborne outbreaks by being proactive rather than reactive. And to do this by identifying possible sources for contamination on the farm. And one of those possible sources for contamination is agricultural water. And we know that agricultural water is a source of contamination from previous foodborne outbreaks, which were traced back to water sources. So there can be harmful bacteria in water, and the bacteria in that water can be spread to your crops. Now, the part of FSMA that concerns water is the Produce Safety Rule, also called PSR, and specifically within PSR, the Agricultural Water Standard. The PSR breaks water down into two large categories. The first is on the left in red, This is water with high potential for pathogen transfer, and this is water that has also high potential for human contact. This means water that's used for things like hand washing, food contact surfaces, making ice during or after harvest, and sprout irrigation. The only types of water that can be used for these types of uses are groundwater and water that's publicly supplied. There can be no detectable E. coli in this type of water. The other type of water that the PSR Agricultural Water Standard talks about is water that's directly applied to growing your produce. So again, this includes groundwater and public supply water, which can be used, but it also includes untreated surface water. This is your ponds, your streams, your rivers. And when using untreated surface water under FSMA, this water has to have a geometric mean, which is a type of average of less than or equal to 126 colony-forming units, or CFU, of generic E. coli per 100 mils. And I'll explain exactly what that is and what that means as we go through the presentation. Your water also has to have less than or equal to 410 CFU of generic E. coli per 100 mils when you look at STV, or the standard threshold value, which is a measure of the variability of your water samples. So if you are using surface water and you fall under FSMA, you have to take a baseline of samples, at least 20 samples, over 2 to 4 years, and after that baseline, at least 5 samples every year. And these samples have to be taken as close as possible to harvest, and the reason for this is because we want to know what's in the water that's actually contacting the produce. So now we know about some of the reasons why you might have to test your water for agricultural uses. And now I'm going to move into some of the reasons why you might want to test your household water if you have private well water. So water that's supplied by municipalities, cities, or counties is tested at the drinking water treatment plant and treated with a disinfectant. But private well water is neither treated nor monitored. There's 43 million people, actually more than that, in the United States who are using private well water at their homes, and this is about 15% of our population. In Maryland, it's about 13% of households, which is somewhere between 780,000 to 900,000 individuals. Testing your private well water is not required, but it is recommended. And knowing what's in your private well water will let you know if there are contaminants that could possibly negatively impact your health. This is especially important if you have specific health concerns, or if you've noticed that your water has an unpleasant taste or smell, that your pipes are corroding, or if there are nearby activities that you're concerned about, things that involve chemicals or biological agents. These are all good reasons why you would want to get your water tested. So now that we know why it's important to test your water, I'm going to talk about what you should test when you test your water. Again, this depends on the type of water that we're talking about, whether it's agricultural water or water in your house, where you live, and specific concerns that you might have. But let's start with what you're required to test on your farm. So when we talk about FSMA, the only thing you're required to test in your water for FSMA under their PSR Agricultural Water Standard is E. coli and generic E. coli. E. coli is a type of bacteria. It's commonly found in the guts of warm-blooded animals, that includes humans, and it's also excreted in our feces. For this reason, generic E. coli is used as an indicator of fecal contamination. That means contamination with animal or human waste. And E. coli is part of this larger group of total coliform bacteria. Now, it's really important to note here that FSMA is talking about generic E. coli. So it's that third large circle in the figure that I'm showing. It's quite a large group of bacteria, and not all E. coli are harmful. There is a subgroup of E. coli called pathogenic E. coli that can cause harm, and pathogenic means disease-causing. And within pathogenic E. coli, there's a specific type of E. coli that gets a lot of coverage in the news, E. coli O157H7, which has been implicated in a number of foodborne outbreaks. But again, it's just important to keep it in context that that's one type of pathogenic E. coli, and pathogenic E. coli just make up a small group of the generic E. coli that we're talking about. So the reason that E. coli is measured for FSMA and for GAPS is to serve as an indicator. It indicates if there could be other types of bacteria that are human pathogens that can make us sick. When we're talking about drinking water, EPA has set standards for drinking water. And there's two types of standards for drinking water, primary and secondary. Primary standards are for contaminants that cause health problems. Secondary standards are for contaminants that are nuisances. They can cause aesthetic problems like affecting taste, smell, or staining, but they won't make you sick. And there's a huge list of primary drinking water standards. But when we talk about private wells, EPA recommends that you test your private wells every year for 2 primary contaminants and 2 secondary contaminants. Those are total coliform bacteria, nitrates, total dissolved solids, and pH. And I'll talk about each of those 4 contaminants in detail. They also recommend that you talk to your local health department because, as I said, groundwater and water is different everywhere, and there might be contaminants in your specific area that are concerning that your local health department might recommend you test, and in some areas, they even do the testing for you. So it's worth getting in touch with your local health department and asking them about that. So let's start with total coliform bacteria. This figure should look similar because I just showed it on the E. coli slide. So again, total coliform bacteria are this large group of bacteria. They're an indicator bacteria, and by and large, total coliforms do not make people sick. They're an indication that there could be something else in your water source. They tell us if there's contamination from an outside source. They could come from human and animal waste or insects, but they can also come from things like soil or wood. And the way that these types of bacteria could get into your well water is if you have older or shallow wells that are being influenced by surface water contamination, or if your well isn't being properly maintained and perhaps needs to be upgraded. The next primary contaminant that EPA recommends you test in your private wells are nitrates. Nitrates are a chemical that are often used in fertilizer, and the reason that these are a primary contaminant is because they do cause, or they can potentially cause negative health outcomes like shortness of breath. In babies, this can lead to blue baby syndrome, and it also can present a risk for pregnant women. As I said, nitrates are commonly found in fertilizer, animal manure. They can also be linked back to linking septic tanks or sewage pipes, and they're also naturally occurring. So now we're moving to these secondary contaminants. Again, these are contaminants that don't pose a human health risk. They're more of a nuisance. So total dissolved solids, or called TDS, is a general indicator of water quality. It's measuring all dissolved impurities that are very small in size, less than 2 micrometers in diameter. High levels of TDS can cause hardness and deposits. They can cause colored water, staining, or a salty taste. High levels of TDS can be traced back to potentially leaking septic systems and sewage, runoff from agricultural or urban lands, road salt or industrial sources, and it can be linked back to natural sources. The last secondary contaminant that EPA recommends you test every year in your private well water is pH. So pH is an indicator of the alkalinity or acidity of a substance. It's measured on a scale from 1 to 14, and the lower the number, the more acidic your water is. Now, you want your pH to fall right in the middle of that scale between 6.5 and 8.5 because there can be issues with having either too low a pH or too high a pH. Low pH, that means highly acidic water, can cause corrosion of pipes, shortening the lifespan of pipes, and possibly introducing dissolved metals that are in your pipes. It can also cause a bitter taste. High pH can lead to a soda taste and also deposits. And pH, it's just naturally occurring. So now we've talked about why you should test and what you should test, and now I'm going to talk about how you actually collect a water sample. So there are some general tips around water sample collection. When we collect water samples, we want to collect a sample that represents what we're actually coming into contact with, or for agricultural water, what our crops are coming into contact with. For this reason, you want to sample as close to the point of use as possible. And what I mean for that is if you were collecting water in your home, if your household water is supplied by a private well, you would want to collect it actually from the water that you are coming into contact with. So that could be the sink or faucet in your kitchen. It could be your bathroom sink. When we're talking about agricultural water, you want to get as close to where that water is being piped to your irrigation system as possible. This could be a storage tank or a holding pond. Aseptic technique is also really important when we talk about water sample connection. And basically, aseptic technique means not contaminating your actual sample. You want to measure what's in your water, not on your hands. So to do that, I'm sure we're all washing our hands a lot right now. You need to start with washing your hands. It's always a good idea to use gloves because we all have different biological substances on our hands, bacteria and viruses that are just there. We want to measure what's in your water, not what might have been on your hands. So wash your hands, put your gloves on. Then it's also important to keep your samples on ice after you take the samples and get it to the lab within whatever time period they specify. And this will be dependent on what exactly you're sampling. So for bacteria can grow. So you don't want them to increase in your water sampling container, in your bottle, while it's being transported to the lab. Bacteria like warmer temperatures and they can grow and proliferate there. But again, you want a snapshot of what actually was happening in the water source at the point of use. So you want to kind of freeze them in time and do this by putting them on ice. For chemicals, chemicals can change depending on temperature. So it's really depending on the specific chemicals that you might be having tested. And the lab should give you specific instructions on how to transfer the water sample to the lab. This might include adding an additional chemical into your water sample to stabilize the water. So now we're going to look at the materials that you'll need when you collect your water samples. Again, gloves. You want to make sure that you're not contaminating the water sample. You never want to touch the inside of the water bottle or even the inside of the lid. You need bottles for collecting the water and a pen for labeling. It's really important to double check with the lab you're sending your samples to, or use this EPA quick guide to drinking water sample collection to determine exactly the type of bottle that you would need for the type of contaminant you're testing. For bacteria, you can use plastic, but for some types of chemicals, you need to use glass bottles. It's also important, again, to keep your samples on ice. This is as simple as a cooler that you might already have in your home and ice packs. You just need those samples to be cool enough that bacterial growth isn't happening. So I'm lucky enough to work on Conserve, which is a center of excellence at the nexus of sustainable water reuse, food, and health. And as part of Conserve, with our collaborators at New Mexico State University, we've created this beautiful water sampling interactive lab, which I'm showing you on this screenshot. This water sampling lab takes you through step by step exactly how water sampling should happen. And it also introduces different scenarios of animals being nearby or other things that might happen in different situations that you need to take into account. And we have it specifically set up for the Mid-Atlantic region and also scenarios in the Southwest. So I highly recommend, if you're planning to take a water sample yourself and you've never done that, to run through this interactive lab. And I give the website here on this slide. It's available at conserve.nmsu.edu. So now we've talked about why it's important to test your water, the type of things that you might want to test, how to collect that water sample, but then how does the testing actually work? For microbial analyses, these are tests that look at bacteria or viruses or protozoa. There's a few basic concepts. First, we want to take the water and find that microscopic bacteria that might be in that water, and usually also be able to tell you exactly how much bacteria in that water. So not just is it there or not, but how much is there? Because, of course, we're talking about microorganisms, so it's impossible to see them with the naked eye. To do this, we have to get just the bacteria out of the water, and we do this using a filtration method. Most labs use a vacuum filtration setup to pull the water through a filter with very, very small holes that are too small to let the bacteria through, but let the water through. And that setup is being shown in that image on the left. The next thing we do, which is being shown in the image on the right, is we place those filters on an agar plate, and that agar contains nutrients that feed the bacteria, and they're placed in a warm environment, usually an incubator, to encourage them to grow large enough so we can see them with the human eye, so we can count them. And this is an example of an agar plate that was used to grow bacteria in the lab. And what you're seeing here is how we actually count the bacteria in the lab. So we use a unit called CFU, colony forming units, and this is what's used in the FSMA standards and also in drinking water standards for bacteria. So what CFU means is one of these little dots that I've circled in this picture on the slide. It's an individual area of growth on the plate. This can contain thousands of bacterial cells, but it's the way that we count how much bacteria is there. And as a companion to the water sampling virtual lab, the New Mexico State University team also created a water testing interactive lab. And what this does is it shows you step by step exactly what happens in that lab. So you can go through this and you can see from the moment that it reaches the lab how you process the water samples and then how you actually count the bacteria that are on those different plates. And there are a number of tests that you can also do yourself at home. This includes testing pH and testing total dissolved solids, or TDS. These pH strips are available at a number of different big box stores for as little as $10 to $15, or you can buy a more advanced electric meter for $10 to $25. And total dissolved solids can be tested with an electric meter anywhere from $10 to $90. Again, this just has to do with how sensitive the different meters are. So once you've had your water tested, what do those results actually mean? When you get your test results, they can come in a number of different formats. I'm showing two different examples here. On the left is how in Conserve we give our study participants their results back. So what we're showing here is the results, what the standards are, and then what it means. But it's much more likely that when you get your water test results back from a lab, they'll come in a format similar to the report that I found on the internet on the right. So showing the results only. But what I want to do for the next few slides is help you understand how to interpret what those water testing results mean. And there are a number of different things that you should consider when you're interpreting your water testing results. First, understand what's being tested. Is it a public health concern or is it a nuisance? Just because there's something that showed up in your water, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to make you sick. It's also important to compare your results to some sort of standard. Again, you have to know how much of a contaminant is in the water to know if it can make you sick. There's no 100% pure water. So just because you have a contaminant that was being tested in your water, that doesn't mean that you're going to get sick. You can also contact water quality experts and specialists. There are people who can help you answer specific questions or go through your results with you. And it's really important to use reputable sources and resources. And I'm going to go through each of these different points. So first, we need to understand what's being tested. Is what you're looking at on your report a public health concern or a nuisance? And here you can use these EPA primary drinking water regulations and secondary drinking water regulations as a guide. If it's listed on the primary drinking water regulations, that means that there's a lot of evidence that it can cause a health concern. The secondary drinking water regulations, again, are for nuisance issues, things that might impact the taste or the smell or staining of your water. So let's use generic E. coli as an example. Remember, generic E. coli is an indicator bacteria. It might not pose a threat to your health. It just gives us an idea if there could be other bacteria in your water that might be a problem. But to know how much E. coli or any contaminant could be a problem, you have to have a standard to compare it to. So there are a number of different standards for water. And again, this depends on the type of water that we're talking about. For agricultural water, we're usually using the FSMA standard. For FSMA, the geometric mean, which is again a type of average, it has to be at or below 126 colony forming units per 100 milliliters. What I'm showing on the left is actually a FSMA produce safety rule online calculator that the University of Arizona developed to help you calculate your geometric mean and tell you if it's above or below the FSMA standard. For private wells, again, use those EPA drinking water standards. If it's above the standard, that means that you need to address the problem. If it's below the standard, that means that it's been determined by the EPA based on scientific studies that it doesn't pose a risk to human health. Again, if you have specific concerns or questions, you can contact water quality experts and specialists. This could be your local environmental health department. So cities and counties have usually within their health department environmental health specialists. These are people who can help walk you through your specific water testing results and answer questions about maybe contaminants that are of concern in your specific area. You can also turn to Extension. So what I'm showing here is a page from the University of Maryland Extension. We're lucky enough to have Dr. Andy Lazur, who's the state water quality specialist, who specializes in wells, septics, and water quality. And on his website, which I'm showing here, he has a lot of information about all of these different types of water. And it's really important to use reputable, I should have it say here, sources and resources. When you are getting your water tested, you want to make sure that you're getting it tested at a certified lab. That means a lab that has done the training and certification so that you know that they're using the appropriate methods and standards. You can get lists of certified labs through Extension. On the left, I'm showing a list that Dr. Lazur compiled of certified water testing labs for drinking water specifically in Maryland and the region. On the right is a list of water testing labs for agricultural water that the Maryland Department of Agriculture has posted on their website, and I have links to both of these lists here. If you're joining us from outside of Maryland, you can also look at your state health, environment, and agricultural agencies and see if they have a similar list of certified labs that can test either your drinking water or your agricultural water. So there's a wealth of additional resources out there about water testing and water quality, but I'm going to highlight just a few here that I've worked on or that are available through University of Maryland Extension. So again, these virtual labs that I mentioned, we have both the water sampling interactive lab and the water testing interactive lab. So you can see step by step what happens and how you should properly collect a water sample in different types of sampling sites. And then we have the companion water testing lab to see what happens in the lab. And it also talks about interpreting your results, understanding, again, what do colony forming units mean? Through Conserve and our collaborators at the University of Arizona, we've also created 2 learning modules. These go into depth, the first on water quality and microbiology, and the second on specifically pathogens, again, microorganisms that cause diseases. There's also a number of different extension fact sheets out there that touch on water quality. Here I'm just showing one that I helped write on water quality and food safety, help understanding what are those different factors out there that can impact your water quality, temperature, precipitation, surrounding activities, all things that can impact the quality of your water. And I have to again give a shout out to Dr. Lazor and the University of Maryland Extension Wells Septic and Water Quality Program. And related to that, he'll be giving a webinar in October as part of the Women in Agriculture Wednesday webinar series, specifically talking about caring for your septic system and water wells. So I'd like to just acknowledge and thank the Conserve team, which contributed to some of the materials that I shared today. And I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That's greatly appreciated. We do have a couple questions, and so one of them would be, will these links be available elsewhere? So, Stephanie, we will be posting the recording as well as Rachel's slides. So when she's finished today, she's going to send me her slides so I can send them on. And then what I could do, Rachel, if you could send me that in a PDF, I can pull the links that you had in there out and include on the page. So those will all be available. We've got some other questions. There was some interest in this in Spanish, and so I've asked the individual to email my individually, and I can reach out to Rachel and others about seeing if this is available in Spanish. Rachel, do you know particularly?
I personally wouldn't be able to give this presentation in Spanish, but I am happy to work with others at the University of Maryland who might be able to help me translate this, and I'm happy to explore that.
Yep, we do have those available, so that would be great. So there's another question. Is there a list of questions we should ask if we have a water treatment service?
I guess I need some clarifying questions. Is that meaning that someone's already getting their water treated?
So she is gonna clarify. I think she's gonna.
Okay.
And apologies for the need for the chat pod. But I'm guessing if you have a water treatment service, like we're having our water treated, but we have 2 wells.
I think generally, you know, following what EPA recommends, those 4 different parameters, TDS, nitrates, total coliform, and pH, that's a really good starting place. And then I would just highly suggest getting in touch with your local environmental health specialists in the county that you live in. Those people are really well informed about specific issues that might be happening in your county or contaminants that they're finding in other water sources near you.
All right. So are those just standard? Those are just standard questions and environmental health from the county?
Yes, and the people in the environmental health departments in the county, they're versed in water quality testing, and they'll be really familiar with these EPA recommended tests. In different regions, there can be things like, you know, naturally occurring arsenic in some regions, and those environmental health departments will know what those contaminants are, and they'll also be able to help steer you to hopefully some certified water testing labs that can specifically test those contaminants.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. She's very good. And I would think that, you know, some of the water testing might be crop specific as well.
Right, that's right. So FSMA only requires that E. coli be tested, but of course, you know, that's specifically about food safety, but there's so many other, you know, things that can be going on in water, like salinity or pH, that you might be interested in having tested. And I would again point to, I mean, I can't highly recommend extension enough, but, you know, your county agricultural extension agents are people who could help you if there's some issue that you think you're having with the water that you're using for irrigation. They can help you try to figure out what might need to be tested there.
Great. All right, is there any other questions? Let's see, let me flip through here. Yeah, water testing is also important for livestock usage. So yeah, that is a great comment as well. So, so is it typically free?
That also is, you know, county by county. And then, oh, the extension services. Okay, now I'm thinking about
Yep.
Extension is definitely free, so that is great. It's a resource that you should use. The water testing, it really depends on the county. Some counties do have resources to test that water for free for you. It really just depends on where you live.
Okay. Great. All right, any other questions? At this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. Please feel free to type anything in the chat pod.